Thank you very much for having me over. Uh, I'm going to try and speak in the next 20 minutes about my journey, about the journey of our company in getting to where we are and where we plan to get to as well. I'll talk a bit about that. So, see, in India, there's a large number of people that I would call are in the working class or the middle class, if you would. What is this population? This is a population roughly about 200 million people, maybe 250, some people say 300, who is earning about 3 lakh rupees a year onwards and could be up to about 30, 40 lakh rupees, but a bulk of it is 3 lakhs to 10 lakh rupees. Now, when most of these people 30, 40 years ago used to be part of a joint family system and today are in a single family. Now, what has that done? When somebody falls sick or unfortunately expires, they have a very, very big problem financially. Just imagine it's a nuclear family living in Bombay, earning, let us say, 6, 7 lakh rupees. And suddenly the primary earning member falls sick, loses their job, and suddenly has expenses, but also costs of living and no salary. And that becomes a very difficult position. They sometimes have to go back to the city they came from because most of us are still connected to the rurals. And it's not a good picture. Hospital costs in this time have been going up. So we thought there was a very deep need for health insurance and life insurance for the middle class in India. The second problem, if there's such a big need, why have people already not bought? There is a large insurance industry. There are 50 insurance players. There are companies that have existed for the last 50, 60 years. There are millions of agents. Pretty much every bank in the country is selling insurance. So why has this need for term insurance and health insurance, which is the primary need for our society, why has that not been fulfilled? And what exactly has the insurance industry been doing for these last 50, 60 years? And when you looked at it in depth, what you identified was that a bulk of the product that was sold were not of the investment category. They belonged of the insurance category. They were more of an investment type product where people would invest to get some return. And the primary requirement of coverage for death or coverage for disability was somewhere never made the primary talk of the insurance industry. And the two categories that commanded leadership were motor insurance, which was compulsorily mandated by the government, and there was investment, which at that time was about 90% of all the premiums collected from the retail industry. And so we got into this position. The first thing we realized was we have to wake up the customer. So we spent the last 12 years, a huge amount of money, a huge amount of time, basically thousands of crores for a small company, which at that time did not have those resources, but today perhaps has those resources. But we've over this last 10, 12 years spent more than 1,000 crore rupees educating the consumer on the need for health insurance and life insurance. And then saying, if you want to buy these products, you need to come and, do some research before you buy them. And in this process, building a brand called Policybazaar. Now, the difficult part when you do this is once the customers come to you, you also need to fulfill their requirements. And that is equally hard, if not harder, in the insurance industry because you're again working with 40, 50 insurance companies. Now, some have got very good processes, but a player like us will always be judged by the lowest common denominator. If 1% of our customers buy from a company which does not have, let's say, very good processes, it's that 1% who will complain and who will be unhappy with the brand. And so for us to have uniform processes which would allow all customers to have a decent experience across the field becomes critical. A third aspect becomes very critical in a product like insurance is consumer fraud, is service provider fraud. And I'll try to explain what these means in some detailed to you. Imagine a young customer who looks perfectly healthy, buys a 2 lakh rupee health insurance, studies in Pune, goes home to Agra every summer holidays, has a relationship, has a friendship with some small hospital who gives him fake bills of a 3-day stay in a hospital, which is below investigation, and he makes a claim. And that he pays 3,000 rupees for the insurance and takes 20,000 rupees every year. Now what that does, it's not about him taking the 20,000 rupees. And that's the most important thing in insurance. He's actually taking the money of the other customers who have put together their funds. Because what is insurance? Hundreds of people put their money. 5 people fall sick. They get the money of those 100 people. But if somebody is not sick and takes the money of those other 100 people, the remaining 95 are cheated. So the person is not cheating the insurance company, he's cheating the other customers. And that's the reality of the insurance industry. On the other hand, you could have a hospital where you need to stay for 2 days, but the hospital keeps you there for 3 days or 5 days, or overcharges. Because you have an insurance policy, I will overcharge. With the already high medical inflation, that becomes a very difficult situation for the insurance companies to manage. Third aspect, there are healthy customers and there are, let us say, people who know they are likely to have a claim, a very high likelihood of having a claim. They do not disclose certain facts and they buy the policy. And after the waiting period is over, they make the claim. Again, they end up cheating the other customers who have given the right declaration. Because please understand, the insurance company does not have money of its own. The money belongs to other policyholders eventually. And the claims ratio of the insurance industry comes from. So for us now, why did I tell you this long story? For any distributor, it becomes very, very critical to do due diligence on its customers and to make sure that the right declarations are being made, that fraud is being prevented. It is not the same as selling shoes. Because whether you buy a pair of shoes or I buy a pair of shoes, they probably cost the same or similar. Or if you take a flight from Delhi to Bombay, it costs the same to you, it costs the same to me. But an insurance policy by nature will cost different amounts to different people, depending on what their situation is. And the declaration of that situation is very important. And so for us, we put in a lot of effort in trying to make sure that the declarations were right. What this led to is a very healthy book of business where company in general, the insurance industry, made a good profit compared to the business they were doing otherwise. Then we go back to the insurance company and say, that's also not fair. If I am bringing you a pool of customers who is more profitable, then I need those customers to get those benefits and better products to be created for those customers because they are honest customers. They're giving you the right declarations. So we want better products for these customers. And that journey began. And some of the companies started creating those products, which are more risk-based, which are more underwriting-based. I think the value of a transparent channel in a category like insurance is immense. It's like gold. Because if you can bring the right declaration and the right product, then the customers do not lapse. They stay for a longer period. And they continue to evolve. Now, while doing all of this, while keeping the insurance industry profitable, while doing a service value for the consumer, one also has to keep a high level of service, which I spoke about, which is equally difficult. And there you will deploy the requisite technology, the requisite manpower, whatever is necessary to make sure that the consumers and the industry do not suffer from a lack of service provision. So there are two kinds of risks one carries, right? One of misdeclaration of customer intent or of product. The second is of service provision and making sure that part continues all along. But what are the kind of difficulties you would face or we faced? I don't know whether you would face those difficulties. See, you're trying to change a very large industry. It has for 50 years, 100 years operated in a certain fashion. Somebody goes to somebody's house, knocks on their door, meets somebody, explains a product, convinces them to buy, and that's how the transaction happens. Whatever the benefits or lack of benefits of that, it's a conversation between two people. Suddenly you're trying to change the game. You're trying to get the customer to wake up and say, hey, no need to come to me. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to do my own research. I'm going to start asking the questions, and I'm going to buy the policies that I like. You are changing the entire industry pretty much. In such a situation, you will, of course, face significant headwinds because there will be a lot of people who do not want that change to happen. Our view out there has been our purpose was true. And so we have to stay the course. Whatever comes our way, we have to try and convince everybody. And most importantly, and this is a very important part, and it helped us quite a bit in our journey, we were willing to die. So we were willing to let our business die if that is the only way the business could, but we would not compromise on these basic principles, these basic foundation blocks, and we would keep, pushing ahead. But that gave us the courage every time these, challenges came to kind of overcome them. Normal challenges like, getting your revenues, etc., those obviously exist here. You have to build your revenue. So, I think it shouldn't be called building a billion-dollar business. I think what we should be talking about is having millions of happy customers. Because if you have millions of happy customers, paying customers, you will of course build a billion-dollar business. That is a outcome of it, not the the first part of it. I think the last and most important part I would like to belabor on is team. See, when we started Policybazaar, there were 18 of us. They were called co-founders. And all these 18 people went without a salary for a period of about 6-7 months, which is not a lot to think about and nothing much to talk about. But just think, how many people in a middle class environment where they are earning roughly about 5 lakhs to 10 lakh rupees a year would like to go without a salary for 6-7 months in a new business, which may or may not succeed. And where they'll be all co-founders, they will, that doesn't happen very often, not 18 people. Usually you get 1-2 people. We had 18 people who did that. And 13 of those 18 are still with us and of course doing very well in the company. But that built a culture of, putting company before self. I think that's very required. We are in 2020 and a lot of people do not increasingly speak about the value of team and the depth of the team. You can never run the company with 1 person or 2 people or 10 people. A company like ours, you need a 200-300 deep team. And I use the word deep again and again, because you need very committed people to that level. And thankfully we have those. So they help us, build a robust organization. Of course, both Policybazaar and Paisabazaar continue to be on that track. I can keep going, but if there are questions, I'd love to take them. That would make it more interactive because all of you haven't really come to hear. There was a question about investors as well. I'll try and cover that. Let me cover that. So our first investor, InfoEdge, invested in us when we were a very, very early stage. They agreed to invest in us when we were just a prototype. And they invested in us when we had about 3 lakh rupees of revenue. So they the month they invested in us, we had 3 lakh rupees of revenue. But we were contribution positive. We have never been contribution negative as a business. So what does that mean? All our cost of acquisition, etc., was always paid off by our revenues. And yes, I would question the quality of our revenues in the initial stages because a lot of it was advertising and lead generation revenues, not sales revenues. Those came much later. Those came after 2011. But at the same time, we were quite honest about the fact that the quality of our revenues was not great, but our revenues were there to make sure we were not losing money. Till the point when we learned to make money on high quality revenues, that was also important, which was the sales revenue. When, in the last 5-6 rounds, we have had multiple investors, but I think it is important to mention, we got Intel Capital and Inventus in 2009 and then 2011. And those were difficult rounds because we must have spoken to 30, 40 people. And eventually Intel was the only company that, agreed to invest. And I remember asking them that, why are you investing? There's a lot of regulatory turmoil in our area. And they said, your company is still on. And that tells us that the suppliers are being added value to and the customers are being added value to because they are helping you guys stay alive and they're continuing to pay you. And hence, we are okay to take the risk that comes with it. After the Inventors round, quite honestly, we have not had to raise rounds. Rounds have come to us. There have been, a multitude of investors in every round who have wanted to, and we've had to kind of, thankfully, we got to that stage after the first 3 rounds where we could choose our investor. So we would have like 5 to 7 investors willing to invest, and we would say, okay, this is the investor whom we believe will add most value to us at this stage. And there were different investors at different stage. At one time, it was Tiger Global, then Temasek, Premji, True North. And then there was a time when, that value was fulfilled by SoftBank and then Tencent. So then Wellington, and now we may have other set of investors coming in as we try to go public. We may have a different set of investors coming in who would be more long-term public markets oriented. So that'll keep changing. InfoEdge has consistently been an investor pretty much through the rounds, and we owe our existence to InfoEdge because, let me put it very bluntly, if InfoEdge wasn't there, we may not have been there because we would not have got the initial capital to build the business. But everybody else was optional. To be brutally honest, everybody else was optional. It wasn't that we had to raise the capital. And that's what I would encourage you to also do. Think of it as one more very important part, which I like to always say about InfoEdge. I think it's not just a financial relationship. It's also, at the end of it, a personal relationship with your first investor, at least. Because, there will be ups and downs. You cannot guarantee success. And during those downs, you have to have somebody who feels bad for your failure and who feels good for your success. Because for the investor, it'll be, 2% to 5% of their money, maybe even 1% of their money. But for you, it's your entire life. And if somebody doesn't care for you, you will be left in a very hard position. And hence your first investor is very important because that first investor has to have, number one, caring for you, not just your business, but for you. And that's a very difficult one to come by. And the second thing is the ability to support. InfoEdge not just had the care, they also had the ability to support. And so they were very, very beneficial to us throughout this period, which goes without saying. But, as I said, happy to take any questions. Should there be any?
With digital transformation taking place rapidly across financial services, how are you able to provide to younger clientele, the younger generation, with regards to insurance?
No, I think a very valid question, very important, very pertinent. See, there are 2-3 points I would make. First of all, as we are learning, the young are no longer immune, unfortunately, to death, disease, and disability. I think each and every young person out there has seen some personal tragedy in terms of a friend or a family member who was also quite young in their lifetime. So I think that is a bit of a sobering note. On the other hand, yes, younger people are safer risk and they need to be priced appropriately in health insurance and life insurance. And people who join young need to have the ability to benefit from the fact that they joined younger for a longer time. So what am I talking about? See, insurance is a very long-term product. You usually buy it for life. As in, you buy it when you are 25, 30 years old and it stays with you till you are 65, 70 years old. Sometimes a product like a health insurance stays with you all through life. And as one gets older, usually the premium starts to go up. However, for people who join at a very young age, a small fraction of their premium must go towards reducing the premium in the older age. Because that has to be the benefit. That the younger you join, the more benefit you receive, or the lower price you receive. And there are two reasons for that. See, as a 65-year-old, you may not, when you become 65, you may not be a different risk from other 65-year-olds. I take that. However, the fact that you bought a policy when you were 25 indicates that for 40 years you've held that policy. And hence, you have not intentionally bought a policy when you were 65. And hence, the chance that you are more likely to be sick and needing insurance right now is much lower for you. And hence, there should be a benefit provided to customers who started early. Already in life insurance, that benefit exists. So if you do the calculation, and I have done this calculation, if you buy life insurance as a 35-year-old, or if you buy life insurance as a 25-year-old, and you buy them both to the time when you will be 60 or 70, I promise you, when you do the calculation, a 25-year-old will pay less money throughout the duration of this policy on a cumulative basis than the 35-year-old, which is a surprising fact, right? That you would essentially be getting the first 10 years of insurance for free. Effectively, yes, you're paying slightly earlier, getting the benefit later. And so in life insurance, it already makes sense. But I think in health insurance also, this concept needs to come in. And people need to benefit from that. We are working hard to make it happen. I think there are various attempts we've had, and we will continue to push in that direction to make sure it happens. How InsurTech is shaping insurance in India? Where do you see India coming years with regards to adoption of futuristic technology for the insurance space? See, insurance, my friends, is people have to feel the need to buy insurance. It is not, of course, from a technology perspective, your claims and servicing will improve. And that has to provide higher confidence to the consumer. We have to integrate with more and more data across industries to stop fraud. So the hospital and the young person I spoke about, who lives in Pune and comes to Agra and gets a bill every year for 3 days, needs to be identified and blacklisted, and that data should be freely available like a credit score, called an insurance fraud score, if you would, across the country. I think all those pieces need to fall in place, and technology needs to be used to impart confidence in the veracity of the transaction, in the sense that the consumer is declaring right and the insurance industry is declaring the product right. I think that is when technology needs to come in. The speed of the transaction needs to be quick, but any help that anybody can provide in that direction would be great. I think as the government rails start to get built out, whether it is on the NDHM as it was with UPI, a lot of leveraging of the government rails will be done by various players, various stakeholders, to enable the use of technology and effectively what we know as blockchain playing out. Because blockchain is nothing but third-party verification of any fact. And that is essentially what personal health records are going to be. So anytime somebody declares something, they don't even have to declare. It can just be verified from the existing personal health records of the individual. So I think you will see technology play a role. But all I'm saying is the role technology needs to play is to impart confidence to the consumer that they are dealing with a product which will pay their claim at the point of need, and it will be convenient for them. I don't think it is so much of an acquisition tool as a confidence provision tool.
Absolutely, sir. So we have another question as well. So a lot of our customers, our people do believe in insurance. However, they find the process of claiming insurance very arduous and very long. And a lot of times there's a lot of fine print also. So, that whole fear around how they go about claiming, what probably should be rightfully theirs. that, how do you tackle that mindset, sir? What, is there any kind of awareness?
Yeah, no, I think that again is going to be addressed through the government rails and through the technology and through data. And I'll explain why. I'll explain why this happens. See, insurance is a 400-year-old industry.
Okay.
And all the contracts you see have not developed in the last 5 years. They have all developed over this 400 years. And it started off by one person losing their ship, or, and then the people insuring it. And then somebody trying to cause a fraud. And then the insurance industry trying to build a system to prevent that fraud. So those contracts have 400 years of learning in how to stop fraud. And that is, fortunately or unfortunately, that is how the whole industry thinks. That how will a fraud happen and how will I prevent that? Right? Now, that conversation needs to change. How will that conversation change? Today when I deal with you, suppose I meet you somewhere, I don't treat you as a fraud straight away. But the reason I don't treat you as a fraud is because there is some information that I can gather about you, which tells me this person is not a fraud. Whether it's your credit score, whether it's your insurability score, whether it's something, some data. Otherwise, I can't differentiate. Now, insurance is a product where if you get 2% fraud, you have destroyed the entire book for everybody. Because typically, if you think about it, an insurance product will pay about 50 to 100 times the premium in claims. So if the premium is 100 rupees, the claim amount will be 5,000 or 10,000 rupees. So if 1% of customers come and make the fraud claim, they have wiped out the book for everybody. And hence, insurance industry ends up spending a lot of time. So we have to ensure that 1% never get into the system. And that can only happen through better use of technology or through somewhere having a mechanism where you pre-qualify customers. That as long as it is you will have and I think the industry needs to start getting comfortable with that thought process. But please appreciate, it's an industry, it's a regulator. People have the right to be insured. The same fraudster will wake up and say, hey, how do you prove I'm a fraudster? I'm not a fraudster. I want the same product as everybody else, right? And he will probably shout the loudest. So it's a complex problem, but whose solution lies in identifying a trusted set of people that you can deal with, which may be 50%, 70%, 90% of the population. Most likely 90% of the population is trustable. And we need to find out a mechanism to be able to trust them. Now, I'll also give you the converse example. Every time in the last 12 years, we have tried to make something easy for the customer. Fraudulent customers have used it to get through the system. Every time without fail. At one point, we tried to make buying life insurance a seamless process. 125 dead people bought life insurance. How difficult is it to fudge papers? How difficult is it to, the point I'm trying to make is there are organized groups looking at every possible ease of process as a process breach. Can I break this process? And then you come with blanket coverage that, okay, we will have this only if a person has 5 lakh rupees of income or above, and I can verify that he's working in a company today. That totally limits the market. So insurance has this constant piece, but I think data-based customer qualification, like a credit score, how does the lending industry deal with this? They deal with it through a credit score. And hence, the insurance industry needs to find an equivalent of the credit score to deal with it.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Dahiya.